program. So we'll get our Facebook people on. We've got our Zoom attendees on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us. I am Kim N., President of the Board of Directors for Dunes-Calumet Audubon. We do have some other board members on with us, and Vice President Matt Kawasinski will be monitoring our Facebook streaming. There he is, to help us out with that. And I'm going to just share our little promos with you of what's coming up this next month or so. So we have, of course, this Saturday, we have Waterfowl with Julie Bonema meeting at Forsyth Park. So go ahead and check that out through Eventbrite. And then, first Saturday in March, join me at Portage Lakefront. See what kind of ducks might be coming through. You just never know about those ducks. So it's at 8:30. And go ahead and register through Eventbrite so that I know that you're coming. And then very exciting, next month we are going to be in person at Gibson Woods at 7 p.m. If you are not a nighttime driver and would like to carpool from the Porter County Visitor Center, send me an email or drop something in the chat to let me know, and you can carpool with me. So that's going to be fun to hear about the Lake County hotspots. And then always we have our merchandise on Threadless. Sometimes I get little things that say, the t-shirts are on sale. So, be sure to sign up for getting email alerts from them. You can order all kinds of different things from them. And I will stop my share and show you I am wearing my sweatshirt. There you go. Sweatshirt from Threadless. And also coming up will be our native plant sale at the Birding Festival in May. So if you're interested in helping out with that, there'll be some more information about it, but I'm just giving you a little teaser. Birding Festival coming up. And I know some of you have already joined us in our little giveaway. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And I'm excited about the presentation today for two reasons. One, the wood thrush just seems to be a bird that very few people have seen. And this program is going to tell us a little bit more about it and what science is doing to learn more about the wood thrush. So Dunes-Calumet Audubon Society proudly has sponsored one whole kit and caboodle for a wood thrush scientific research. And I'm sure our presenter, Brad Bumgardner, Executive Director of Indiana Audubon, will tell us everything we ever wanted to know about the Chasing Melody Wood Thrush Scientific Research Project. Am I right?
Yep, you are absolutely right there. You can have a chance to do that here. Actually, I'm going to actually share my screen as well. Can you guys all see that?
Would you like people to put questions in the chat for you? Or are you going to ask for questions later?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you have questions as we go along the way, I'm not even opposed if you find a time to unmute yourself and yell it out, but definitely throw it in the chat. I know there's folks on Facebook too, so we'll be able to monitor all those questions and be able to get a chance to answer all of those. And, thanks for having me. You mentioned, you started saying that he can tell you everything you'd want to know about. And I thought you were going to say wood thrush. Like, oh no. We could spend hours just talking about wood thrush. And I remember my days in interpretation where there's so many cool things, and you really have to learn to narrow it down. Your sub themes. What is it we're going to talk about? When I was a naturalist, we talked about too much stuff about a topic. We called it interpret vomit. And I don't want to give you a bunch of information all about the wood thrush, because we're going to narrow it down. We're going to talk about something so cool tonight that I'm really excited about, and I think you guys should be excited about, because we're at a crossroads with birding. and crossing in their kind of research and conservation, where science and technology are meeting today in a different way that we didn't really envision a decade ago. And I remember when I was giving kind of beginning birding presentations and talking about kind of, where the advances are occurring. We were talking about optics. We were talking about fluoride lenses and nitrogen purging and all the ways that we're seeing these improvements in birding out in the field, and could have never envisioned the apps and the AI and the technology that's all incorporated today that allows us to do so many cool things that are going to benefit birds in here in Indiana. And so I'm really happy to talk about the Chasing Melody, our wood thrush conservation project that we'll be hosting here in 2024. You've probably heard about it. We were talking a lot of bit about it last year, trying to generate the funding for this really large scale study that we'll be doing this year. But before I really kind of get into the project, I want to kind of give an introduction. Kim obviously mentioned I am the executive director for Indiana Audubon, and there's a lot of confusion oftentimes over the different Audubon chapters. And so as a separate independent Audubon, we're actually older than national. So Indiana Audubon was founded in 1898, makes us the oldest conservation organization in Indiana, and we have members throughout the state, as well as some 20 plus states and some countries too. And no doubt because of a little festival that draws people in from around those different areas. Our mission: to engage communities in the enjoyment of birds and their habitat through conservation, education, and research. So I sort of think of like the spotting scope that you good chance you might have. And so that tripod that's holding it up. And so what Indiana Audubon's mission is, be able to connect those three legs of that tripod. And when you have a project that has the research that then can drive into education, teaches folks about it, and then that same information can be used to give into the landowners to be able to conserve that bird on the land. Those are the amazing projects that Indiana Audubon likes to connect and engage folks with, that they can really see that full cycle of kind of where we fit in and how the birds fit into our worlds as well, and what we can do to keep them going. So for now 125 years, Indiana Audubon's mission has been in those three conservation, education, and research categories, which of course leads us to why we're here tonight. And of all the different, 420 some birds that you can find in Indiana, this is a species that I think a lot of folks connect to. And so a lot of it, though, isn't necessarily by the looks of the bird. It doesn't have the bright colors of a painted bunting, but it's certainly known as a thrush for being quite the songster. And you often think of thrushes like robins and bluebirds, but the entire thrush family that we have is a real notable group of birds that some of them are short distance migrants, some of them are long distance migrants. Some of them look plumper, like the wood thrush does, versus say maybe a more thin bluebird. So there's different genuses involved, but this entire group of birds, one of the kind of key signatures is their music abilities. And the wood thrush is probably the king of them all. They all kind of have this fluty-like calls. Another trait is all thrushes have spots on their chest. You might be thinking, well, what about that robin? There's, it's all brick red. But if you look at the baby birds, look at the baby robin, look at the baby bluebirds, you'll see that spotting. So some of the main features we're looking for thrushes are that bright musical sounds, the spots on the breast. And the wood thrush, I think, is really kind of the master, as I mentioned, of them all. It's that real fluty kind of eolay. Frito-lay is kind of a mnemonic I've heard used for the bird before. You hear a peewee in the background there. This really, that sound brings me personally to the entrance road to the Indiana Dunes State Park at about 4:58, 5:05 a.m. on a May morning, when those birds have just come in from that overnight migration. And I'm out there, and you hear, of course, off in the distance, the gobbling of the turkeys, and then that wood thrush is out there and deep in that woodlot area. If you do get a chance to see it, because we got some neat traits, amongst our different thrushes, there's a lot of identification issues that can occur. Our Swainsons and gray cheek thrushes tend not be quite as rufous colored. And that spotting on the wood thrush is so distinct, so heavy, distinct. It's not blurred or smeared like you see in like a hermit thrush. So I like to think when you're seeing those different brownback thrushes that you're trying to ID in the Hoosier woods, when you see the wood thrush, they pop out. Right away you're seeing a wood thrush. And of course, if you hear those sounds, it'll lead you right to the bird. Where are you going to find them? Well, we're looking in forest habitats, and I'll show you a little range map of kind of where we see them in Indiana. But any kind of woodland habitats where you're going to find them, both in migration, in the breeding season, and even down on the wintering grounds. Food, think of your robins. They're out there kind of jumping around the yards, eating worms and grubs. And so, same case for a lot of these guys. They're often foraging on the ground, kind of kicking leaves out of the way. They're looking for worms. I've learned really how much thrushes, like robins, feed on these different kinds of earthworms and such they can find. And an observation that a professor had made years ago, I remember, was a really dry fall, and it was mid-September, and we hadn't had rain in forever. And so the woods were just, that soil was so dry. There were no insects. And that year, despite there being, thousands and millions of these thrushes, we didn't see any in that forest that fall. And so obviously these birds are following the food source as they move around, both within the breeding season and in migration. Nesting, so we know they're nesting in trees. So real similar like you're going to see with a robin is you're going to have that kind of stick and grass-like nest that's kind of stitched together. It's usually kind of positioned in a tree branch. Of course, it's not going to be out on an ornamental plant like in your yard. It's going to be deeper in the woods. You get a chance to see it. Here's a photo of one. And it kind of highlights some of the risks and issues that we have. There's some of the forest fragmentation, where that's actually a brown-headed cowbird chick that's helping to feed. But there's a good look at a wood thrush that you would find sitting on a nest in Indiana, typically 5 to 10 feet, sometimes 15 to 20 up in the air. Behavior we already mentioned, kind of ground foragers. So they do kind of a lot of hopping around, looking for food, nesting not too far up above that. And this is the big story right here, is just the declining that we're seeing. And so we're looking at a total about 60% loss in all of our wood thrush over the last 30 to 40 years. And you've no doubt heard about some of the larger losses that are occurring across the entire taxa of different birds out there. But wood thrushes have definitely been one, and we'll talk about some of those reasons why. If you pull open your Sibley guide, this might be a typical range map that you're going to see for wood thrushes. And so just looking here, you see that the orange is their breeding areas. They migrate south. This isn't a far distant migrant where they're going into South America and Colombia and Venezuela. So most of the wood thrush that we have are wintering in that Central America area, from the Yucatan all the way down through Panama. But just looking at that map really simplifies it. And it doesn't tell the whole story, because we know that these birds are nesting in forest habitats. So when I'm looking at that breeding map, I can probably guess that Ohio has more breeding wood thrushes than Iowa. But just looking at this range map doesn't tell you that. But this is where we have things like eBird and Cornell today, where they're able to do analysis on this data, and they can actually look at trends and where these birds are actually at. Then they can extrapolate and actually determine just from that, like what percentage of birds are nesting in different habitats. And so today, you might open a field guide and see this kind of range map, but if you open the eBird or Cornell site, you're going to see something more like this. And this really shows us the relative abundance of where the birds are in that breeding range. And versus that field guide map we just saw, look at Iowa and then look at Ohio. And so we can clearly see, a much higher percentage of birds are nesting in Ohio than are in Iowa. And Iowa looks like it's rivers, so it's probably within those riparian corridors where they have it. Look at Indiana. You can kind of see where those breeding birds are. And so obviously in the Hoosier National and the large forest down in the southern part of the state hold more breeding wood thrushes in the northern part. And you can see the geographic boundaries of the different states there. And so taking this whole population as a whole, I mentioned extrapolating kind of percentages. And so what we know is from that data we have, there's our modeling from eBird, 3.6%. That is not a small percent of, basically you're looking at the overall worldwide population being a species that's pretty much endemic to just the United States and Canada when it comes to the breeding range of the bird. And so a really important species for Indiana. And if you look at all of these conservation priority species that nest in the United States, that winter down in Central and South America, for a state of the size of about Indiana, 4 to 5% are really some of the high end for some of the nesting species. So this is a pretty well represented bird for the state of Indiana, looking at the relative abundance maps from eBird. Why are we declining? We kind of hit on some of them, is that habitat loss, deforestation that allows for nest parasitism, invasive cats, that's across the board. We know there's indisputable data on that. Collisions, whenever you look at downtown areas where you got warblers getting hit, thrushes are usually amongst the mortalities that we see. So they seem to be particularly drawn to some of the city lights. And going back up, that first one I mentioned, habitat loss. It's habitat loss here in the breeding grounds, and you have to factor in habitat loss on the wintering grounds. And fortunately for the United States, we've had 40, 50 years of different Clean Water Acts and different laws to help strengthen the environment. And so we've seen a lot of our forests actually return. We still are seeing some forest loss in particular areas of the United States in that breeding range. Imagine old farm lots that get turned into subdivisions. But then we also have that loss down south in the wintering range as well that we can look at. And I mentioned climate change. It's worth putting in there. I don't think it's necessarily always going to be as important on some of these species. It's, especially the farther they are up north into the boreal forest, as climate change pushes birds northward, they don't have anywhere else to go. So there's a little bit of room here. When I think of climate change, my biggest concerns are vegetation and plants, because as the temperature change, a bird can fly and move to a new spot pretty quick, but the plants can't pick up and move with them in that same pace. But it's still worth mentioning when we look at all the different reasons that we're seeing declines in wood thrushes that equal that 60%. Here's kind of what we assume wood thrushes do. And some of this data that we get here comes from traditional bird banding. So you put a band on a bird, it has a 9-digit number, you send it off, and you kind of hope that it might get intercepted. Now, in traditional bird banding, that interception rate is less than 1%. So not a lot of birds are actually getting intercepted. But a lot of the range maps that we see and a lot of these kind of arrows that you're looking at, they're coming from that limited data set. And already what we kind of know is that not every wood thrush goes to the same spot. And there seems to be, even though you can't tell them apart, there's not really a subspecies status, there are populations of movements, and that they are genetically wired to these different areas. And so it's assumed that a lot of the birds in the Northeast are probably going down a little bit farther. Birds in the Midwest area may be going down to more of the Yucatan area. But we don't know this for certain, because you could have a bird in the Northeast that was just simply intercepted through an area, or maybe a lot of the birds just got seen in the Yucatan and then weren't recovered as they continued southward. So it doesn't really give you the whole picture compared to what is some of the work that we can do today with technology. And we were just talking about that loss. And so there's some couple great graphs or a couple maps. And you can see the Yucatan, you can see Belize, and then down to Honduras and Costa Rica. So where the forest cover is, we know this is a forest species. So we can extrapolate and assume that most of our populations are settling in one of those main areas that are forested in Central America. But look at the other map, see where the greatest forest loss is occurring, happens to be in so many of these areas where our wood thrushes are wintering. So I mentioned they're important. Here's one great way that we know they're important. Just listen to them. And this is a bird that is kind of an umbrella species. It's that there's so many of these nocturnal migrants that it belongs to, that when we see losses in wood thrushes, it's a signal that we're seeing losses in all these other birds too. And we know that the Nature Conservancy uses wood thrushes as one of their 12 key signature species for forestry for the birds. So, these are the hardwood species that best represent a healthy forest. And so they're included in that. So we know this is such a critical bird, and really important to be able to understand why we're seeing losses here. Introduce where science meets technology. And today we were able to take these up a level and do new things that we haven't been able to do before. And specifically, you may have heard this reference before, but the MODIS network is this new way that we can track birds across landscapes. And I say birds, not just birds. They're doing all kinds of things that are moving now that they can put these little tags on and start to not just get A and B, but now we can start to connect the dots all in between, and we can look at migration routes. We can look at the speed of migration all through this MODIS network. And amazingly, it's It's rather simplistic. You know, what we're actually doing on the ground to actually intercept these calls. The technology is that little tag that's there on the back of that bird, and then to give you kind of a little rundown of it. So what MODIS is you're taking these little nano tags, these little transmitters, and they give a little ping or a pulse, and they can give that in different time intervals, 30 seconds, couple minutes. And all you have to do is send that signal out, and you just need a basic Yagi antenna station, such as you see there on the left, this tracking station, to be able to intercept those calls. It comes down to kind of a sensor station, and it's able to interpret analog and digital signals and then stream them into this MODIS website where it can actually record what is that transmitter ID, what is the bird species that's assigned to that, and then we can assign it down to an individual bird to track these birds across the country. And as you see here, Swainson's thrush, red knot, even monarch butterflies, they're able to put some of these super tiny MODIS tags on. Here's just a blurry map zoomed all the way out, and every yellow dot would be a MODIS tracking station. So it's one of those antenna stations that's set up to be able to intercept birds. Let's get a little bit closer and zoom in here to the United States, and you can really see how they start to populate in. And when I was looking at this map 5, 6 years ago, there wasn't half of these dots. And this has really exploded in the last 5 years where folks are recognizing all the potential, because just a single tower site can help with every single research project, in addition to whatever birds that you might be researching at that particular site too. Since you're able to intercept data from other birds that are flying by, and it's all factored into one kind of website that all that data is going to. And so as we build this network, what you start to see is that if I had a tagged bird wearing a little MODIS tag and I send them off to the Northeast, it's almost impossible to not get intercepted by one of these towers and get a return on one of these birds flying. And so we almost kind of start to call them MODIS fences. And so they're just designed that as a bird flies over them, it's going to be able to get detected no matter where it's going. And as you see, Indiana isn't quite as full as you see in like Pennsylvania and New York, but we're seeing more and more come online every year. And there's already, I know of 2 or 3 stations that are currently in the works that hopefully by 2024, by the end of the year, we'll have those all online too, to really help capture the entire data set of all birds, not just Indiana birds, but from other states that might be flying around too. As I mentioned, just constantly expanding. So we got sites like state park towers that we can get, the higher we can get an antenna, the better reach that we can get. A lot of fish and wildlife areas in the last couple of years have had some MODIS towers set up, or go right to the visitor center. You'll see those there. I think that maybe a goose pond picture there. Indiana Dunes and Mary Gray Bird Sanctuary are the 2 current ones that Indiana Audubon owns and manages and collects data from. So we take all of that, all of the potential, all what we can do with MODIS, and we start to marry those together. And so what happened last year was there was a proposal through with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to really understand the decline in wood thrush and where all these little mini populations are going. Because think about it, if you're a Hoosier like me and you want to protect the Indiana wood thrushes, well, I want to make sure that that donation that I make that's going to help them in their wintering habitat is going to where the Indiana birds are wintering, whether that be in Belize or Mexico or farther down in Costa Rica. And so we can actually fine tune it based on the data that we're going to be able to get from this project. So we call it Chasing Melody. And so it's technically, if you ask the Indiana DNR partners, it's the Chasing Melody Wood Thrush Conservation Project. And it encompasses, we're talking not just a couple MODIS tags, we're talking about 600. So we are really truly going in the first time a revolutionary look at an entire species by having 600 birds tagged around the breeding grounds, around the wintering grounds, and in migration. And so every state, every little dots, if you divide out all these different tags, you're getting about 25 to 30 tags that'll be coming to Indiana that will be live transmitting across that MODIS network and be able to be detected both in Indiana, in migration, and on the wintering grounds. And so this is being not just an Indiana project, but it's being done in all these different states that you see that have the MODIS networks in place to be able to get the detections from these birds. our Fish and Wildlife folks, they don't call it Chasing Melody. I don't think they even call it the Wood Thrush Conservation Project. They got a much bigger name. It's the range-wide modus tracking of wood thrush to inform conservation across the full annual cycle. I like Chasing Melody better. Why we can do this is just look at the evolution of bird tracking. We know that traditional banding has been going back hundreds of years. The first banding in the United States was actually attributed to John James Audubon. He had written about taking silver thread or string, and he had tied it around phoebes in Kentucky, and he was able to kind of track them out there as he put the little strings on them and saw that the parents had returned. Go back, even more farther back, and we know that some of the medieval like falconry, they were marking their birds as well. Go to just the last 20 or 30 years, we've had different advances in technology, and geolocators has been one that's been used for quite a bit of research as well. And basically what those are kind of like a solar panel. And so what it's able to do, it doesn't transmit. So you actually you put it on the bird, and then you have to find the bird again and take it off and basically plug it into a computer. But it's like a rudimentary GPS. And so it's detecting the length of daylight each day, and it's able then to figure out kind of a rough idea of its GPS location. And so I've seen that done with swifts and swallows, where they can put those on their back. And then we move into more radio telemetry, where we're actually have transmitters and batteries. And that's where I think of like the early days of Operation Migration. If you ever like followed the whooping cranes around, and I would see the trucks that would have those big Yagi antennas, and they're kind of tracking the cranes and seeing where they're going. And so that was some of the early radio telemetry work. But today, the biggest thing that I think is really moving this technology is not necessarily the actual like technology, because we're using cellular networks, we're using satellite networks that have already been in existence, but it's the battery size. And as that technology gets better and the battery gets smaller and smaller, it's ridiculous what we can put these things on. And even for birds, there's different ethics committees and review panels that make sure that anything that's done to these birds as we track them isn't a detriment to the bird. And so there's some general rules, usually like 2.5%, 3% of a bird's weight can be taken in there. And so what it allows us to do as those batteries come down, as you can see, even with a dragonfly, is literally get these things on smaller and smaller birds that we weren't able to do before. And so, before you were getting more like owl size, were the smallest things that can take them. And so now, a wood thrush carrying one of these modus tags is nothing with its pot belly on them. We're putting them on much smaller things now. And that actual nano tag, so there's kind of a picture of it. So we're looking at just over a centimeter long. And there's a little tiny, what we call like a whip antenna that comes out of it. And the average weight on these nano tags is about 1.5 to 2 grams. So for perspective, if you drop a penny in your hand, that's about 2.5 grams. So that would be like the heaviest of nano tags. And so most of these are about half of that weight. And then those antenna stations that you see, they have a 30-kilometer, about 20-mile range on them. So all it takes is that transmitter pinging maybe every 30 seconds, every minute. The longer the periods that you go, the longer the battery life's going to be. And that's where you're going to be able to get birds that are sending out a signal for not just 18 months or 2 years, but 3 or 4 years. And as you're flying over a tower area and you have a 20-mile range, all you need is just a couple pings there every couple minutes, so that you can get that signal off and be able to get a detection on the bird. Or if you went like half an hour, a bird could hypothetically fly completely over it and not get a chance to ping off there. So there's a lot of things that we can do to tailor the tags for the research that you're doing. And it makes it such a really neat system. For the downside, of course, as we've decreased the size on everything and made the technology better, is the price is still expensive. The prices are going down, but an average tag that you see there, that little 1 centimeter, is about $250. And then, of course, you still have to find the bird to be able to put that tag on them. I found this information. This is just to give you a perspective of what we can do with something like Chasing Melody and the large scale that they're doing this. This is just a couple modus tag results that they had from gray cheek thrush. So a different study, just a few birds were done, and they were actually tagging these gray cheek thrush from Colombia in a modus station down there. And what we were discovered just from this little project was that one of them actually made it all the way up to Indiana, or no, yeah, just southern Indiana. That was 2,000 miles in 3 days. So it pinged off May 5th, and then by May 9th, it was in Indiana. A single thrush continued through Indiana and ended up flying 4,000 miles to make it up to its breeding grounds up on Hudson Bay on June 6th. So here we're starting to kind of get an idea of where some of that migration went just in great cheek thrush. Now, they almost look identical when you look at a Swainson's thrush, but amazingly, that's completely different because they're also doing Swainson's thrush in British Columbia. Again, not at the kind of the levels that we're talking about with wood thrush. And what we find with the British Columbia Swainson's thrushes is they all take off and head east. And they kind of angle through the Dakotas and Iowa. And we had a case 2 years ago where several of them, all in the course of about 48 hours, were pinging off of all kinds of Indiana Motus towers, and everywhere from Jasper Pulaski to Mary Gray Bird Sanctuary across the state. All of these Swainson's thrushes were coming through in early October. And it makes me think, we previously would think this is a bird migrating at night. You're not migrating in a flock, but those little call notes that you heard earlier in that nighttime migration probably serves as some sort of contact note, flight calls to kind of keep everyone together. And of course, they're all utilizing the same migration conditions that same night. So it's so interesting that, that these birds from British Columbia, are 3,000 miles away, and yet somehow they've all gotten timed and they're within a couple miles of each other in a completely nocturnal migration. And so I can't imagine, a bunch of folks that could only drive at night somehow all coordinate and arrive at the same time somewhere at the other end of the country. Just the first bathroom break and we'd already be separated, right? So there's already been really cool work done with other thrush species, but nothing has been done with the wood thrush, which is a breeding bird in Indiana, which is losing 60% of its population. And so there's some real answers that need to be solved if we're going to be able to conserve this species and still hear that flute-like calls. And so there's a lot of ways that you can help. But what you're going to find is over the course, starting from May through July, we have folks that are trained with bird banding. They have to get special authorizations. So a bird bander typically works for a couple of years, learning how to handle birds, do the banding process, and then you get an authorization after training on how to put these little tags on. So think of it was like little backpacks. So they kind of go around under the bird's wings, and they'll have little straps that kind of come up in the legs so that it fits snug, yet doesn't interfere with the bird. And so they will be doing banding throughout the state because we want to not just know, where some of our birds are, but we want to get the best picture of where all the Indiana birds are wintering at. So we will be banding up in Northwest Indiana, Indiana Dunes, down through Kokomo, Indianapolis, and then all the way down to southern Indiana, in the Goose Pond areas and over near Bloomington. And then, of course, all at our Mary Gray Bird Sanctuary to the east. So we do have statewide representation. There's going to be opportunities for folks to keep learning about this, getting updates on the banding, and there's going to be some cases to see it. Now, it's not always easy because a lot of times, a bird set up on territory, the researchers get out, you got to get the net up, you get the bird, it's done that quick. But there are opportunities, especially at Mary Gray Bird Sanctuary, that you can to watch it. In addition to that, there is a banding session that is scheduled for the Indiana Dunes Birding Festival. If you haven't seen it on the schedule, I don't blame you because there's like 180 programs. It's hard to digest them all. But I did find it. It was Thursday at 8 a.m. So when registration is live March 1st, if you actually want to participate and take part in that banding, we'll be at the Dune State Park putting Motus tags on wood thrushes for the Indiana Dunes Birding Festival. You can adopt a wood thrush. And so you don't get to keep the wood thrush and take it home with you, but you will get a certificate of every single bird that we band. And what's so cool then from a traditional adoption is that with a Motus adoption, we can give you that tag number and it's on the Motus website. And you can go in there and look up your tag and see any towers that it has intercepted with. And you can follow the life of that tags and other tags. And so folks that are able to help support it as a forest steward, whether you're just sponsoring a bird through an adoption or you're funding the entire life of a bird, which is like $500 for the tags and everything that's from start to finish to be able to track that bird. In addition to that, we do have a volunteer page on our contact us on indianaaudubon.org, among the other resources there that you could actually sign up for some of the volunteer opportunities that occur, whether it be bird banding, but a lot of the different activities that we do too. A lot of ways to help. And it's been no easy undertaking. We're looking at, as I mentioned, 25 to 30 Modus tags at like $300 a piece. And then we have to, get out there, get everyone trained, get all the equipment. We were just getting transmitters today that actually track the birds in the field. And these transmitters are like $2,000 a piece. And so it's taken a lot of sponsors and partners just to get kind of where we are. We still have a lot of work to get done this year, and then potentially with some banding in 2025 too. And so we've had the great partners I mentioned, sponsors, a lot of Audubon groups, Robert Cooper, Sycamore, Sassafras, Evansville, and of course the Dunes-Calumet that we're here for tonight have all kind of sponsored a single bird from start to finish. So your bird will be represented down in Costa Rica or Belize somewhere, hopefully by mid-October. We'll see. What I think most exciting is that what this does, this blend of science and technology, allows for us to take research, conservation, and education, and we can blend those. And so then we can actually take real research and excite people and show them what we can learn about these birds. And those folks then want to help keep this kind of project going, and they donate or volunteer. And then that keeps that research alive, which allows us to keep getting more data sets. And the more that we can get, the more informed we can be, the more informed that we can advise forest owners on how to manage their forest for wood thrushes, and that and the other 11 signature forest birds that we have there. And so this is, I think, just the tip of the iceberg on what we can do with science and technology today. And it's come along so much just in the last 5 years. And I've heard of other projects already in the works with Modus and other species similar to this large scale that I won't reveal yet, but I'm really excited that if it happens later, that we may be here again talking about a new species that we're able to track across its entire range too. But I think, that for the last 6 months, as we've been kind of building this and getting all of our ducks in a row and all the research permits and everything, it's so exciting to see. And we owe so much to everyone that's watching here and the different Audubon chapters that have helped support it. But I'm certainly glad to be here and happy to answer any questions, Kim and Matt, that you guys might have, and anyone else.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll be watching the chat for questions, but I have a couple questions. Are there certain trees in the forest that the wood thrush prefers?
Well, we do know that I can give you a really easy answer: native. And there is specific research that has been done that has shown that birds that are forced to nest in non-native species have a lower success rate than birds nesting in native species. And if you think about like a native forest and you got, oak or maple and maybe spice bush in the understory, and then go to another area, maybe more of a suburban woods, and you see autumn olive and bush honeysuckle, and those are really dense, lower to the ground. And as you part that, they're a monoculture. There's nothing else. There's no diversity in there. And so as part of that, birds that are nesting lower to the ground have higher predation rates. Raccoons, fox get into those nests. And so we've actually been able to measure with things, especially understory nesters like wood thrushes, chestnut-sided warblers, where they just get predated more when they're in there. So just hands alone, if you're planting native, you're already miles ahead for that bird. And so then you can really nitpick into what species, but really the understory species they're nesting in is really going to be more based on the soil and forest type of where you are in Indiana. So, if you were up in the dunes, it would be spice bush. If you were, maybe young beech trees or pawpaws, if you were in another part of the state. But the key is they're all native.
Okay. Yeah, Linda was wondering about that. So managing the woods and forests, she was wondering what that entails. So what you're saying is eliminating the non-native species and planting the shrub species and trees that are more native to either northern or southern Indiana.
Yeah. And definitely, being a species that's prone to the edge effect. And so where you have cowbirds coming in, so the larger, more contiguous forest lots are going to be more supportive and provide more of an actual boost for the population. Where those little tiny woodlots that are 30 acres, you get a wood thrush in there, but he probably isn't successful each year because they're getting predated by predators in there because there's non-natives or there's cowbirds coming in there. And so those little tiny woodlots, we end up calling them population sinks. So there's birds there, but they're not growing the population and they're just continually not producing young in those kind of habitats.
How many acres does a wood thrush kind of need then?
I guess it depends on the rain levels and the worm supply, but in the breeding area, they're probably looking at more of a smaller 10 to 20 acre thing. And so the encroachment and the size of the forest isn't just for them, it's more just the buffer from the things like the cowbirds that are coming in. Cowbirds are, easily measured coming in a quarter mile into forest habitats to seek out nests. And so, if you think you got a good sized woodlot, start measuring in and realizing how far in that some of these guys are going in to look for nests to drop their eggs in.
Where is that program during the birding festival going to be held at?
Wilson Shelter. So you may it'll actually probably kind of piggyback on the bird banding that already occurs there on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. They'll actually be targeting them. So rather than just kind of staying at the Wilson Shelter, they will probably be going down the trail and targeting where some breeding wood thrushes are and actually setting up the nets on site and trying to get them there. So a little
Are
more
there
walking.
are there any places in Lake County that would be, I mean, you talked about the entrance to the state park, and now you've been talking about the Wilson Shelter, which is in the Indiana Dunes State Park. Are there any other places in Northwest Indiana that would be a good place for someone to go to listen for wood thrushes?
Yeah, certainly beyond the state park, so much of the national park is going to have breeding wood thrushes. And so all the way into, the West Beach Woods, the Heron Rookery, through Beverly Shores, you're going to hear them. And then I'm sure many of the Lake County park sites that are large enough, we're going to have wood thrush. The best way, if you want to look today and where to find wood thrushes is go to eBird, go to the maps, put in wood thrush, and then filter it and put in June and July. So that way you're not going to get all the migrants that are in there. And if you look at June and July and where those dots are, that's where they're probably nesting. A singing bird in June is a nesting bird, or at least he's attempting to. And so those birds that are recorded in those months, that's a good sign of where you can probably come back at first week of May and hear a wood thrush singing.
So, if we had just a small little plot, 5 acres, or our backyards, there's nothing we can, we just out of luck to try and get a wood thrush, or could they
But you
maybe
totally get
stop in?
migrants. I played that little calls, the flight calls as they're coming over. And, one of our other projects you may have heard we're starting this year is a citizen science nocturnal flight count project. And we know that in some nights there are literally hundreds of thrushes flying overhead. And the thing that I think blows more people away is they realize my house in this urban site has all those birds. And yeah, once the lights are turned off and the birds are migrating, it doesn't matter whether you're out in the country or you have the most urban site, those birds are flying right over your head. And so if it's timed with sunrise, those birds are having to come down and they're looking for stopover habitat. I'm sorry, stopover habitat. And so we've talked so much about breeding and wintering habitat, and yeah, but the stopover sites, so where they're going to be able to rest and refuel to make that next leg is pretty important. So even those 5 acres, we're not worried about cowbirds coming in because there's no eggs during this period. So even those sites that you're managing are helping all of those stopover species. And we hear a lot more stopovers of shorebirds because they make the really big jumps, and so how critical those are. But it's important for all these migrating birds that are heading 2,000 miles, all being fueled on just little worms and bugs.
So whatever we can do to promote those insects in
Yeah,
our backyards, huh?
think of your 5 acre lot as a Tesla charging station for birds. So you're providing all the spots for that journey for him to be able to pull over, charge up, and continue on.
Cool. You said that there's going to be 600 birds tagged in this project. How many are going to be in Indiana?
So Indiana's portion is going to be about 25 to 30 tags total. And so we'll be covering that. And then so if you divide that out, 25 to all the other states, and then there's a lot of countries down south. And one of our other partners that was on that list I didn't mention was the Sam Shine Foundation. And so they were looking to support the project here in Indiana. And when they heard that all these bird lovers gave a lot of money to the Wood Thrushes to get that project going, they said, you know what? We're not going to donate to the program. We're going to actually sponsor and put up a new Modus tower down south in an area that needs it to help this project more. And so you see them listed. And so that's kind of what they're doing on their end, is to help to expand the capacity and capability of our little 25 to 30 birds that we'll be sending down there later in the fall.
Are there more Modus towers that need to be put in Indiana? Are there enough? How do you know when
Uh,
there's enough?
So, our idea would be, again, a Modus fence. So you kind of connect the dots there. And so you have a lot of organizations working on them. DNR is doing it, Indiana Audubon, IU, we have the Indianapolis Zoo, Fort Wayne Children's Zoo is putting up towers. And so really kind of where we go from here is the coordination, where then we can look at what everybody's doing. We can overlay where's our greatest needs, so that we can all share, hey, this is where it's at. So if you're looking where to put one and you're looking where to put one, we can all kind of agree on some common sites that we're not just putting them up anywhere. Then eventually they're going to connect. So we can try to strategize this. And so there are Midwest Modus working groups for different states. And then collaboratively that we can kind of coordinate that. Indiana Audubon's priority in the last year has been in the Marion County, Indianapolis area. There's potential for a lot of research projects. So we're working on some in the Northwest and the Northeast areas of Marion County. And then the Indianapolis Zoo has been working on one for the central southern part of the county. So once those are live, there is not a wood thrush that'll pass over Indy and not get detected by a Modus tower.
Hmm. Wow. Well, I don't think I have any more questions. We'll have to see if anybody else comes up with any more, but a lot to think about. And of course, I can go to, I think you had up indianaaudubon.org/chasing melody. There you go. So if you
Oh,
want
yeah.
to adopt um, your very own wood thrush and get a certificate and be able to track where it's been. Um, Once the program gets started, I'm guessing that Dunes-Calumet will also receive information on where what our bird number could be or whatever. Um, so that's kind of a fun thing that we'll try and help uh, give out that information as it comes through. We have
Yeah,
another, yes.
you'll find that the adoptions will go live March 1st. You'll be able to start adopting a wood thrush. It'll come not only the certificate, but you'll get a little water bottle with that Chasing Melody logo that you can have. And so once about May arrives, and as they start banning them, they'll start kind of sending those out. And as they mentioned, yeah, you'll be able to track it right on the website, and the different chapters will be able to get updates too. And so anyone that's on there will be able to continually watch it over the course of the project. And then Indiana Audubon will be able to summarize all 25 in case you didn't adopt one or you're not on the Modus site, and we'll be able to produce reports. And if you're a member, Indiana Audubon has the Indiana Audubon Quarterly, and that's our semi-scientific research journal. And of course, there'll be different articles and stuff sent out to the public on where these birds are going and any detections that we get during the course of the project too.
So this project isn't expected to be completed until 2025, the actual finishing of the tagging.
We want to tag everything this year. So 2024 is the goal. We have them divided up amongst the different researchers. Each one's taken 5 to 10. There is a potential though for continuing into 2025 if we have tags that we don't find enough wood thrushes or they're just kind of eluding the nets. We can continue. We're hoping to kind of get them all banded in 1 year, and then we can go from there and look at maybe buying more tags in for the next year if there's enough early results that we can get.
So who are the researchers who will be actually looking at the data? Is that yet to be determined? Is that the Fish and Wildlife? Will the
Yes, so U.S.
university?
Fish and Wildlife is coordinating the larger project, and there's a Missouri Conservation Fund. They're sort of funneling the funding and purchasing the tags. Sarah Kendrick with U.S. Fish and Wildlife is is kind of the principal investigator for the overall project. Within Indiana, it's a DNR and Indiana Audubon joint project. So you're going to see researchers, including volunteers and staff with Indiana Audubon, as well as DNR employees that will be deploying some of the tags throughout the state. And I myself is a licensed bander, so I will hopefully put a couple of tags up in the Indiana Dunes. And when we do those, probably later in June, you may get some opportunities or read about chances that you can come watch that live and in person.
So you said then if you're tagging them between May and June, or that's when we could hear them, May and July, and they'll be heading down south by around October, and then they'll be coming back again in the spring of 2025. So that information that comes out, how soon will we see, like, I don't know, some results or an article or something?
Yeah, so you'd be now with research. Let me back things up. With science research, we know it's slow. Drug trials, it's slow. So you usually have a lag of about a year or so, and then kind of peer review for some of the articles that they're going to be producing. So that's going to be about probably a 2-year timeline you'd expect. But we'll be able to produce stuff, the same year, the next year, summary reports, and we'll have continued data coming in from those tags at any moment from that website, since they're going to be 18 to 24 month lifespans for them. So it could
Mm.
be a year later and we're still getting more data in, and we're trying to write a report up on what we've got already.
So once we've adopted one and we get that information, we'll also get the information on how to see where that particular one, where it's going. That
Mhm.
information will be included, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So if this is designed to kind of track the migration too, how will that help us? How will that then filter down to the conservationists that have to make decisions?
Mhm. The biggest part is where we're going to be putting conservation dollars. So we
Mm.
know how to improve the habitat, but we don't know where necessarily we need to improve the habitat on the wintering grounds. And so there's programs. Indiana Audubon has the Mumford and Keller. It's a grant and scholarship program. And so we have targeted money in certain areas in Central America in the past. And so being able to get the picture on one of these key signature species that's had one of the largest losses, I think it will start to kind of identify where those losses are occurring so that we can apply those conservation stories and the things that we know on those areas and put focus on those. And one of the coolest things that we have now from eBird is they've taken this map and they've shown where the wintering ranges are on all of these critical species that have high percentages that nest in Indiana, things like Henslow sparrow. I think like 7% of the world population nests in Indiana. And we can overlay all of these wintering ranges and produce a heat map and really see this is the biggest area where our birds are wintering. And so if you want to put your conservation dollars in a certain country, where I'm going to have the biggest effect at making sure that that wood thrush this winter has a good habitat and food source to come back to my woodlot again. And so that's going to be the biggest stories. Um, we may get some stories on where some of our populations are declining more in Indiana during the breeding season, but a lot of that we know up here. We know the reasons for it. We know the predation. We know the cats. We know the forest quality are all issues there.
Awesome. This is a great project. What a wonderful thing for this little bird.
And
Um,
a bird that
happy
folks
look.
really love, they connect to with that song.
Yeah, yeah. And to think that we could be finally helping to save this species and the populations of this bird through these efforts is just a great thing. Because we hear about so many other things going on, and what can we do? Well, here it is, right in front of us, and we're doing it. Wonderful,
Absolutely.
wonderful. Okay. I don't know if there's any other questions. We'll take a moment to see if anybody has anything else to ask. Otherwise, I'm just going to throw this up one more time. This was the Threadless, the site if you wanted to get a Dunes-Calumet Audubon item. They may have, somebody asked about cotton shirts. They may have cotton shirts, but go to that website and you should be able to find something. Some item that has our logo on it. So the Kingfisher, the belted Kingfisher. Great. Well, thank you so much, Brad, for sharing all that with us. And we at Dunes-Calumet Audubon is very excited to be a sponsor of a tag and help a little bird find its way. And hopefully it'll be a very successful project. And we'll be looking forward to more information about it. Don't forget, everybody, that next month we are going to be in person at Gibson Woods. A lot of thank yous are coming through for you now, Brad. So if you guys have a chance to get to your emojis and show a little reaction, you can put a little happy face up there, or a thumbs up or something that says how much you enjoyed this program. And if there's no other questions, we'll let you all go. And maybe you should go outside and see if there's any owls calling. There won't be any wood thrushes calling, but there could be something else.
Yes. Well, 2 months, they'll be back.
2 months. Well, I have my backyard ready. I got my trees in place. I've got a lot of wood on the ground, pretending like we're in a forest. So we'll see what happens. So thanks everybody. Thanks so much.